So we've got about 20, 25 minutes here before we have a drink. And I want to invite, if you're standing in the corners, come sit. We're going to have a final bit of the conversation here. I'm going to invite my panel to come and join me, if you will. So Greta, everyone come on stage. This is meant to be a bit of a wrap discussion. So I'm going to invite the panelists to come and join. And what we want to do a little bit is summarize some of the key points that we discussed today and really try to look out to the future. So it occurred to me recently that I was doing a budget exercise at the Media Lab. We were looking at suddenly a date that came up which said 2020, that we're almost at the turn of a decade. We've got another decade in front of us. So I kind of wanted to use this opportunity as a way to maybe take a little bit of a historical perspective on this issue of machines, media, where we're headed, and to also reflect on the day we've had today. Hopefully you've been exposed to some new ideas and had your mind challenged in some way. But Greta, you, I know, have been here of all the panelists on the stage all day long, and you've been taking copious notes. So I have to start with you. Give me some feedback, give me some first thoughts for you on the day that you've had.
Well, it's funny because I was going to say something about Kelly Bourne's comment about a perfect storm. And then, lo and behold, so I'm so glad that nature has decided to illustrate this point, which is that, as Kelly said, we're in a situation where polarization, platform power, the clickbait of outrage, all the things that Tristan Harris has talked to us about with regard to attention, and the advance of technology has led us to a place where we have a little bit of a crisis. And so I'm here to be a bit of a bummer on the panel, I think. I'm just standing between you and your drinks, so that's my job. There's a report that just came out from a group in the UK called .Everyone, and I found the findings of this report really, really interesting. Which was that when they used a mixed methods approach and polled people across the UK, and they found that over 50% of people said that technology had improved their lives personally, but only 12% of people said that they thought technology had improved culture and society. And so really the question that I am coming out of today with is one about values and principles. And I have some other big questions about selfhood and our legal system and regulation and all kinds of things. But the bottom line for me, and I am the director of the Digital Equity Lab along with Maya Wiley at the New School, so I'm going to ask about equity and where are we with equity? We know that there are problems with machine learning and algorithms when it comes to equity. We haven't talked much about it today. So I want to open that question and talk about, just open the space to sort of deal with this perfect storm and the implications it has for us culturally, socially, in terms of our principles, our values, who we decide to be as a culture and a society.
I've got to turn next to Steve Brill, because when we talked on Friday, some of those same themes were the things that you're concerned about. You've got a new book that's looking at this sort of 50-year trajectory, where we got to. And I know you're concerned with some of these same issues going forward.
Well, very much so, although I can't help but notice the irony of talking about digital equity in a building that is financed by the most expensive editorial product on the planet. So I'll just observe that. What I've been concerned with, and what you and I talked about, were two things. First, how technology in many ways has enabled distrust of news, in particular by making the brands that someone as old as I am, used to appreciate, really fade away, because on a news feed or a search, whatisfracking.com ranks higher than an article from the Washington Post about fracking, even though whatisfracking.com is secretly financed, they don't disclose it, by the American Petroleum Institute. So what we're doing with NewsGuard is we're labeling sites either green or red, although we haven't, formally rated what is fracking.com, I have a prediction that it's not going to get a green. That's one element that really concerns me. The second, just as a general matter, is the polarization. And here I can just use, any number of the cliches that unfortunately have become cliches. We read the news we like to read. We get stuff from friends who agree with us. And I have a visceral understanding of this because I'm a Yankees fan. So when the Yankees win, as they did the other night, I will watch the whole game. I'll watch all the replays. I'll read the Times, the Post, the Daily News, every account of the Yankees winning because it makes me feel good. I'll time the 11 o'clock news so I can watch all 3 reports about the Yankees winning. When the Yankees lose, even when they start to lose, I will turn the television off. I don't want to read about it. I don't want to hear about it. Now, I actually think that's okay as a baseball fan. I think it really sucks when it comes to the news that we should really care about. And I think that's where we've gone as a society and particularly as a country, this year. So one of the things that I hope NewsGuard can achieve is that by telling people what brands they can trust, by literally supplying a nutrition label that you can scroll over the green and the red and see who are these people, do they come at things from the left or the right, neither of which is bad, but are they sincere people who wake up in the morning and try to tell their version of the truth, or are they propaganda, or are they self-interested without revealing it? I think that can be a pretty good step forward. And the way we're doing it is, may get a little bit of a hostile reaction to some people in this audience because we actually think that when it comes to this problem, human intelligence is better than the artificial kind. We're hiring journalists to read and rate all of those sites and write the nutrition labels.
So I want to maybe I'll jump to Jared next, just because to defend the House of Bloomberg, perhaps. But just your perspective. You were on this panel. You were on this panel earlier, last year, and of course the things have moved quite a long ways, even in the year that we've had. With regard to the relationship between media companies and the platforms, with regard to what we know about the problems of misinformation online. What are your reflections in that year?
I don't know. We're still trying to wrap our arms around it. We see the platforms trying to respond. We see things like NewsGuard erupt, as far as combating the fake news issue. But there's this other large force, which is, I think, obvious to everyone, but you really do have to remind yourself that, users are it's just been this acceleration of users having all the control of their time. And so you see it in a million ways. You see it on the growth of social video streaming services and all the rest. My hope is that with all the pain over the past year, users take more control over their privacy and their data, and at least it looks like they take that very seriously in Europe. And I know that this building and probably media companies, in fact, the U.S. is supposed to be pretty good right now as far as complying with GDPR. But my hope is that people value their privacy as much as their time going forward. The rest of it is just, trying to keep up with what has been. It's not, I was saying last week, it's not that the world is really more complex. It's just never been this complex at this velocity. And so the speed of the news cycle, I think, has been a challenge for everyone. And sometimes it does take a really big, really expensive, well-funded newsroom to try to sort of wrap your arms around what's going on in the globe. So, from my perspective, we're trying to focus on accommodating people's best interests, and whether that's a story that they may not wanted to read, but it's important to them, or whether it's respecting their time and their interests. We spend a lot of time with design, trying to get out of the way between readers and the information. You'll see new formats from us, and just try to tame what has become, one of the wildest and, I guess, fastest media environments, in the history of the planet.
So we've got two executives from big media companies on the panel. Jim, I know as head of strategy at the Associated Press, you spend a lot of your time now trying to cast your mind forward into the future, and especially to imagine this relationship between entities like the Associated Press and your customers and the social giants. What can you tell us about the future?
Well, my job has been to live in the future for like the last 15 years. I've been the strategy chief of the AP for that long, but and before that I started the digital news department. So I've been involved for 25 years, and it's been one disruption after another. If you go all the way back to just the electronic access to news in the first place, and then the web, and then search and social, mobile, and now machine learning, and I guess I would say just this early into it that the machine learning disruption, or the opportunity, both the challenges and the opportunity of the machine learning disruption, could well be the biggest disruption of them all.
Bigger than mobile.
Yeah, for our business, and I don't know. I can't read into the social impact just yet, but from a point of view of a news agency, machine learning can help us on news gathering, news production, and news distribution. So it has the prospect of improving each one of those points on the value chain, which could be the secret sauce to funding journalism going forward, to try to reduce the cost so that we can move the creative people to the higher order work. So we got into automation in 2014, kind of stumbled into it through with natural language generation, just taking data sets and turning them into narrative stories automatically. And we tried it out with the NFL, produced 300 little stories on every offensive player in the NFL every Monday, and proved that, okay, a machine could do a task that we would never assign a human desk to do, because just too much drudgery, not enough return for the amount of human effort to put into it. So having done that, we then decided to do corporate earnings. We went from here to there, and had even more success. So every quarter, the AP produces corporate earnings stories on every single company in the stock market. And the first version of those stories is automated, is produced by machine. Human editors do not touch it. The humans build up on the stories that are the most important stories of the day. But some of the longer tail just go out. And the wonderful thing that happened is that Stanford University did a study and discovered that we had increased the liquidity of the stock market by providing coverage of this these long tail companies. So that got us going in this direction. Now we're looking at all kinds of ways to automate content and free up the humans to do other stuff. And then the smart machines will also help us improve the outputs and enable us using our metadata to produce bespoke custom packages for our clients, so they don't get the same. All the clients don't get the same thing. We can even version the story so that people can get different tone of voice, long, short, bullet points, narrative. Those are all things that are going to reshape the business. So I'm very optimistic about it. I know there's challenges in taming the machines, but I'm very optimistic about the output.
And Michael, I got the same sense of optimism at Hearst right now about this transition to being an information or a data company.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Hearst is in an interesting position as over time our assets have shifted from the traditional media space, consumer media, more towards information services and software. So we have a lot of proprietary data assets, curated data assets on the information services and software side that obviously have huge applicability for AI and machine learning. In the consumer space, it's a little more challenging because we have very curated content. We do have a lot of news, but in the consumer media brands, particularly in the magazine businesses, that content's hard to replicate with a machine. So the question is, to what extent can you use a machine to assist in the production process versus displacing the production process? And Rahel, who was on the stage earlier from our team, talked about a lot of the peripheral processes in terms of image classification, reuse, republishing existing content or repackaging existing content are all very, very relevant to us.
So I'm going to ask a question. Generally, Greta, I'm going to start with you, but I'll throw it to the rest of you as well. We've got 10, 12 minutes. I'm going to just hit you with a couple of quick questions before we go to cocktails and carry on this conversation over them. But there was a sense today of this tremendous amount of opportunity. Startups with amazing new technologies, big companies doing awesome things with automation, and yet also this sort of feeling like we're playing with fire a little bit. Like we don't know quite what's going to happen. Did you get that sense, Greta? And why do you think we feel that way on the whole?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. I did get that sense. And one moment I thought was really interesting was some of the folks that work with smart speakers and voice talking about the sort of uncanniness of seeing their children interact with these products. It made me really think that we don't know what's going to happen. And I think there's a deep sense of sort of uncanniness about this, and where we see with augmented and virtual reality, if your perception is filtered through something external, is it still you that's perceiving this? Where do we attribute intent? What does that mean for our legal system? How do we make rules and laws and regulations when we don't have a clear sense of who we are anymore as a culture or even as individuals? So I think there's a deep sense of uncanniness, and that's coupled with some of the really great work by scholars like Sophia Noble, who's speaking right now at Data and Society about algorithms and inequality and the ways that algorithms and things like Google search reinforce inequalities, racism. Virginia Eubanks, I'll name her, as well as somebody who's working on automating inequality, the way that machine learning can reinforce and amplify existing inequalities. And we're just starting to grapple with all of this. And so I think, when I kind of compare what I heard today about public interest, balance, fairness, right? These are all principles or values. Neutrality, although I'm sort of on the fence about that one. And then on the other side, I hear efficiency and convenience. I have to ask myself, who do we want to be? Like, as we're sort of deciding who are we in this new kind of world of information and epistemology, who do we want to be?
Steve Brill, this is kind of, you were talking about this idea of true progress. What is true progress? Does this get at some of what you were trying to get at there?
Yeah, when you and I had the discussion, we all like progress, right? Everybody loves progress. Everybody loves efficiency, usually. So if you say to the advertising marketing place, I want to buy ads, make them as efficient as possible, that used to mean, have your beer ads on ESPN and, not on a daytime, soap opera. That was, targeting. Now we know that targeting is something very different, and it creates the kind of echo chambers and polarization. It also creates a disincentive for appealing to a general audience. Look at the 1960s and 70s, the great progress, the great invention of network television united Americans. We watched the funeral of JFK all together on one of three networks. We watched the moon landing. Before that, we listened to Edward R. Murrow on the radio. Now, media technology has done exactly the opposite. Now, there were problems with the earlier stage because you had, 5 or 6, entities that basically controlled all the news. Now, the good news is, that everybody controls the news, but everybody is in their own, echo chamber. There has to be something in between. You have to ask yourself when you read, if you haven't already read it, the Tom Wolfe, the obituary in the Times, maybe one thing to consider is where would Tom Wolfe fit in this economy?
Jared Sandberg, is this a period where we're questioning progress and what progress means?
Yes, but just to get back to an earlier point, there's a difference between fear and panic. And I think the fear that, and having read through the program and not taken any notes or been in attendance here, I'll time shift and watch the video next week. But I think the fear is actually a healthy thing. It is nice that we are all vigilant and watchful for people who hijack the technology or bias that's written into code. I mean, just from a practical point of view, and there's nothing nearly as sexy as what was presented up here earlier today. But, just to get algorithms to select stories of popularity and things like that, it's not very easy or very fruitful sometimes. And so, I have this mantra downstairs where I want it automated with manual override, and I think that's what Steve's talking about as far as hiring editors, Jim's talking about as far as doing, more in-depth stories that algorithms just fall short on. Understanding is a different thing. And so I think understanding the ways in which, this code can be deployed for nefarious means, which we all kind of got an object lesson with this year, and but also understanding what they're good at is different. But morals, ethics, understanding, bias, insight, they're only as good as their programmers, and sometimes they're much worse. So, I think I think the fear could be very constructive in this notion of progress, because it will keep us on the rails and safeguard us against really going astray. And we've seen, unfortunately, in the past year, since we were here last year, we've seen some really bad things happen. And it's nice to see the industry, multiple industries, whether it's technology or the media industry, respond to it. So we're sort of picking ourselves up and dusting ourselves off and doing the right thing. So, and I'm not generally an optimist by nature. I don't see much percentage in it. I like to be a pessimist and pleasantly surprised. But I do feel like people are, it's nice to see that everyone is attacking this issue, from, computer labs to media to technology and all the rest.
Jim, Michael, anything to add there?
I think anyone who watched the video of Google Duplex responding and didn't think,
With the ums and ahs.
with the ums and ahs, and didn't think at the same time, this is the most amazing thing I've seen, and oh God, this is terrifying, would be lying. Mm-hmm. I think our data science lead reminds me every day that ethics in data science is possibly the most important thing to be teaching data scientists going through college at the moment. I happen to agree with her. I think more and more the decisions about what gets produced and by whom is going to rely on the machine that was built, as you rely on the ethics of the person building the machine in the first instance to validate that it's producing correctly.
So I'm going to throw out one last question, and then I think we're going to go have a drink. And that is, this decade ahead, we should have some reasons to be optimistic. And I would like to hear one reason from each of you that, as you say, we're dusting ourselves off right now after a year of kind of torrid kind of discovery about the media and technology ecosystem. What's a reason to be optimistic? Steve, have we bottomed out? Can we be optimistic about the future?
Well, as a general matter, as I say in this book I have coming out in a couple of weeks, things seem to be getting so bad that they're going to get good. Mm-hmm. That people are going to react in all different spheres like this one. And while I wasn't here all day, in fact, I started the day getting on the shuttle to Washington, but I did get to watch the pitches in the last program. You can't not be optimistic watching that stuff.
Greta?
Oh, yeah. I think there's so much room for optimism. And I want to remember and keep in mind what Claire Wardell said this morning, which was, we just keep having conferences. So part of my optimism is that I think we actually have some concrete other things to do. And I just want to name a few of them, because I think we can all get busy with ensuring that we place some values and principles into this field. So I think one thing we can do is organize the industry. And so Jared was talking about the difference between fear and panic. And one thing I like to say is, don't panic, organize. So that means really thinking about how power works in the industry and challenging it and finding ways to bring people together to work together. And some of the folks that are doing that are Sarah T. Roberts, Sophia Noble, Sita Peña-Gangadaran. It's great feminist practice to name the other women who are doing good work in the field. I'd also really like to shout out Maya Wiley, my co-director. I think that journalists should be reporting on artificial intelligence and machine learning so that people understand what it is. These systems are already being used in our cities to make decisions about criminal justice, about how our city systems work, infrastructure. We should know. We should understand this. I think that we have a chance to think about the personal versus the collective needs of society, and that's something we can do in all of our communities. And I think that we should all be doing forensic analysis of the outcomes of these systems in order to understand what the root causes are of those outcomes and try to make them what we want them to be.
John?
I think the cost of digital publishing, digital news publishing is going to go down by an order of magnitude. And that's a good sign for anyone in the business. I think a small group of 5 people will be able to do the work of 50.
We're going to get journalist superpowers?
Journalists will have, or the human being should relish it. It's going to be, they will have superpowers because of what we will build underneath. And secondly, I think there's going to be a whole range of new experiences of news that go well beyond, a touch screen and talking to the speaker that we're going to see in the next 10 years that are going to be incremental and will make and redefine what it means to be on, connected, and being able to call up information on demand, being able to ask questions and get answers and all of that stuff. I think that's ahead. So I look forward to it all.
To build on that point, I think the 2 technologies that I'm the most optimistic about are voice and AI, and they're related, obviously, but I think both of them are barely tapped in terms of their actual impact on our businesses and on the market overall at this point, particularly voice. In its current form, it's great, but I mean, after hearing Duplex, I think everyone's opinion changed of what a voice experience could be. And AI really, in terms of the workflow impact and the production impact of AI, we really haven't seen it yet. So both of those things are poised to change our industry for the better, I hope, overall, as long as we provide enough oversight of what they're producing. So I think it's probably the best time to be in technology and media at the moment.
Jared, last word.
Just from a journalistic point of view, I mean, the value or the real currency of journalism is credibility. And, when you think that right now there are people, whether they're at the AP, whether they're New York Times, Washington Post, Reuters, downstairs, they are really sweating out how to express something, how to tell a story. This isn't easy. They're probably gathered around a desk, and they are really sweating it out on how to be most accurate. It is hard to imagine that what's happened recently, that currency of credibility is not being revalued, and it's becoming more valuable. And so it's nice to see the success across the industry after what was a pretty bad year.
So we'll end there with words of optimism from our panelists. I want to thank you very much.